Hey everyone, I'm back on our live channel again. My name is Jocelyn. I'm the chef and founder of Todo Verde. And this live is going to be a conversation with our Congressman Jimmy Gomez, who will be sharing a little bit about the work that he's been doing in support of independent small restaurants like Todo Verde that has definitely had to transition and find new ways to kind of tread along during this COVID-19 pandemic. There have been many different businesses who have had to completely change their business models, others that unfortunately closed down. We're seeing institutions and restaurants that have been around for many, many years that are unfortunately shuttering their doors. And so we want to talk a little bit about, what we do in food, what I do in food, why I think that the work that a lot of restaurateurs across the country are so impactful and important to communities and holding space for people. And let's see, I see Rep. Jimmy Gomez in here. Let me go ahead and add you onto this conversation. Here you are. So please enter your questions in the chat box. I want you to be a part of this conversation. Hello, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's great to kind of officially, unofficially meet you. I mean, I guess
Exactly.
this is kind of like how people are meeting nowadays, which is kind of weird, but here we are. I want to thank you so much for the invitation to talk with you. I've been talking to your staff who have been so amazing. Eric has been so great and really kind of getting our conversation going. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, have it to be like a conversation that's flowing, but talk a little bit about obviously like what a lot of restaurants and folks in the food industry are dealing with, which is this pandemic, right? Yeah. That a lot of us totally did not expect. I started my business back in 2015 with this idea of, one day I want to open a restaurant. And that day almost happened in March. And guess what? As COVID happened, I decided to literally run away from that lease that I was about to sign because I knew it would be essentially a really bad business deal, knowing what was kind of on the brink of or on the horizon.
Yeah.
But, somebody like me still has those aspirations to eventually have my doors open to our community. I mean, my work has really been around building community and gathering people around being better with the types of food choices that we have and really decolonizing our foodways and coming back to like nutritious sources of food and having conversations about it. And so I hope one day I'm able to make that happen, although I don't see that happening in the very immediate future, But I'd love to talk a little bit about, on that topic, there is the Independent Restaurants Coalition that is organizing to have Congress essentially support independent small restaurants across the country with a bill that would essentially allocate billions of dollars to these restaurants that are suffering right now. So what is the work that you are doing around that particular journey?
Yeah, no, just to first let me just say congratulations. I heard you got engaged. You and Rudy got engaged. I know Rudy from just politics and government and fighting the good fight on a variety of issues. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Of
course. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And then also we so just although I worked at Subway. I never worked at a real restaurant, but my dad actually, that's where he worked at restaurants for my entire life. He was a cook up until a certain point. He worked at a Del Rey that existed in Brea or Fullerton. Once upon a time, that's where I was born in Fullerton, and we lived in Brea, and then we had to move out to Riverside when we got displaced from a firm buying up the property and then building a strip mall, and literally where my house stood is now a Taco Bell. So I got replaced by bad Mexican food, if you call it that. So my family has been in, my father worked in a variety of restaurants, and it was always tough, right? So we want, and there's so many people in the Latino community and a variety of communities that work in that industry, right? That
Mm-hmm.
work in the back of the house. My dad was just a line cook, and that's how they support their families. So when the restaurant industry got hit, as you know, it not only devastated people who had dreams to open up their own restaurants, right, like yourself, but also the people that had them, and then people who were struggling to keep their employees employed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was proud that we did pass the CARES Act, and we did have a PPP loan program. It was hard, and we restructured it in order to give more advantage to mom and pop businesses versus the big corporations. And then at the same time, we had the emergency economic disaster loan. So that was a big help, but it was still not enough because just the requirements, right, of shutting
Yeah.
down, social distancing. A lot of people don't have access to the outside. A lot of people don't have access to, uh, different requirements that they have to meet, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
know that in LA County, you only, if you're a bar and you didn't serve food from before, then you can't open up again in that kind of way. So it is really a county, city by city, county by county issue. But we actually at the federal level included, and this is thanks to Earl Blumenauer, his bill. He's on the Ways and Means Committee with me, introduced a bill to help independent small restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
And that bill is very targeted, and we actually included it in the HEROES Act, in the skinnier vision of the HEROES Act. So we think that if it actually, when we get a chance to pass the HEROES Act, the new one, even if it's temporary for between now and January, when we hopefully there is a Democratic majority and a Democratic president, that will pass a bigger bill. So that bill is just the beginning. You
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of people advocating for it, the Independent Restaurant Association, but also just individual restaurants have talked to me. Even in D.C., there is a restaurant where it's called the Democratic Club. And there's a Republican club and the Democratic Club. It's basically a small restaurant that people pay a
Mm-hmm.
membership for, a small membership, and that's where they actually were lobbying members as they were going in to eat about this bill. So
Yeah.
we're on top of it, but I know that it's still very, very difficult for small businesses right now
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
a
Yeah, I
variety
mean,
of fronts.
it's been really difficult. I mean, thankfully I've been able to pivot in a way that still is keeping the business afloat.
Yeah.
We've been doing a lot of virtual offerings and things of that nature.
Uh,
But I know a lot of my friends who have their own respective businesses haven't been able to pivot in that way. So they really are still counting on, selling those
mhm.
meals to people. And there's I think it's what's been really difficult is just kind of this sense of confusion that everybody has around like how to stay safe and what is really safe.
Mhm.
And, I think that more guidance on the federal level of just how to operate a small business like a restaurant or any service for that matter
Yeah.
would be super helpful. And I know that's hard to kind of impose and imply what
Yeah.
that would look like. But I think that it's a lot of pressure for a small business owner, period, to figure out like, what you're going to do with all these employees who are counting on you for their day to day,
Mhm.
income. But then on top of that, you have this additional layer of like, I don't really have too much guidance on how to keep these folks safe, but
Yeah.
I have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's a really tricky place to navigate through.
Yeah, and you're pointing out something that I think people have recognized is that there was really a lack of leadership at the federal level, specifically from the president, right? And
Yeah.
that lack of leadership is felt through every department, through every agency, through everything.
Mm-hmm.
Even the simple thing of telling people to wear a mask, right? You can never do, even
Yeah.
though we know that if you told people to wear a mask, especially his supporters, infection rates would go down, a lot of the restrictions
Yeah.
would be lifted and people would be able to get back to work. But he
Yeah.
chooses not to. So I know that Joe Biden has said he's favor of a national mass mandate, even though there's some people who are going to say it'll be hard to implement, but you can still lead by example, and leading by that example will make a difference. And there's different things that we can do at the federal level. We're more on the tax side. What can we do to help provide relief to the small businesses? How do we get more funding to the small businesses so they can stay afloat? What we can do through the Small Business Administration to help guide small businesses that are trying to, and small restaurants to stay open. But a lot of those restrictions are based on, county recommendations. I think that as long as people follow the science says if it's outdoors and people are wearing masks and they're 6 feet apart, people are going to be relatively safe. But I know that some people can't afford even the relatively safe part, right? Because they're either in the high risk category or they have a compromised immune system. So it really it is really dependent on each community. But I want to just say that I know that restaurants are a big fundamental bedrock of our communities, right? Especially in the 34th Congressional District. I love my district because of the diversity of the neighborhoods, the diversity of the people, and also the food diversity in the restaurants. That was one of my favorite things. I would always show people just the different neighborhoods, what they can eat, what they can drink. And now we're suffering. And I used to, like during the middle of the pandemic when we were really in lockdown, I would go on walks around the neighborhoods. I mean, lawn walks in the mornings. It'd be a 2-hour walk around the neighborhood, and it would just pain me to see all these boarded up shops.
Yeah.
Because I knew what was there. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean it's been really tough to see it, and knowing that, I know some of these folks and their stories and their struggles and their employees.
Yeah.
And it just, as you say, it pains you definitely. As somebody who is advocating for, the Heroes Act and the work that the Independent Restaurant Coalition is doing, what would you suggest that someone like myself or folks in the community who want to advocate for restaurants could do to help push that forward?
One of the things they can, and you have I've noticed your Instagram followers is a good, healthy number. Asking them to contact, I don't think they're all in the 34th Congressional District on this side of town, but asking them and your other individuals who are, chefs and restaurant owners to lobby their own members of Congress to ensure that this is included in the final package, right? Because until it goes through the legislative process, it's truly and gets signed, it's never a guarantee. So having them also lobby on behalf of on behalf of themselves and their other constituents, but and also connect the dots a little bit. Most people don't understand that, restaurants often help buy up a lot of the produce and a lot of the product for farms, family farms, other businesses, and when you're not operating, that's a big strain on those family farms,
supply
right?
chain. Yeah,
exactly.
We really saw that huge shift. Like farms were throwing out food that they just couldn't, they didn't know what to do with it because the supply chain was just broken.
Yeah.
And so, I think that, people don't really truly understand the impact that restaurants hold. They think, oh, that's just the place I go when I'm hungry and when I feel like it. But restaurants really truly are, part of the cause that like keeps our system flowing properly. And it would be a shame to see, so many of these businesses go out of business because the way it's like projected to go, it's not looking well, right? And so it really is like a situation where it has to be all hands on deck, essentially.
No, I totally agree, and that's why, when we try to help restaurants, we're actually helping the small farmer. When we're helping restaurants, we're helping the workers. When we're helping the workers maintain their, giving them $600 per week in unemployment, it's so that they can actually continue, their rent. Oops.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's my bad. That they can pay the rent, but also go out and patronize a lot of the local small businesses to keep them afloat. So it's all connected, and even to an extent where I saw chambers of commerce, small ones in the neighborhoods, and they wanted to do something to feed the public. They contracted with local restaurants to buy so many meals, and all of that helped. But what we need to do is get the vaccine, make sure we get it out to people, make sure we can open it up as safely as possible. So I know that's going to be still an issue, and we're not there yet, but we're going to do what we can to keep you afloat. Because we want your restaurant to continue. We want you to build your restaurant like you had envisioned, to employ people, and also help the Latino community be able to taste good food that's also healthy, right? That it's still culturally sound.
Exactly.
Just to mention something, you mentioned something about decolonizing of the food. I grew up. My dad was a bracero in the late 50s. He actually grew. My mom and him at one point also lived on a little platform that they worked, one room adobe house with thatch straw roof, and he brought a lot of that stuff from the farm to the States. And I remember when I was a kid, we would have eggs, and he would give us the brown eggs, and we didn't know better that those were the good ones, right?
Yeah.
Like we actually were like, what? We want the white eggs, right?
Yeah.
And it's like now everybody has their own chickens in their backyard, and when we were criticized for it, right?
Yeah.
When we were criticized for raising chickens, even though that was the healthiest thing to do, we were criticized for it. Composting, shoot, we did that when I was a kid, when it was out of fashion, So
Absolutely.
composting,
All the things. I feel like I also co-founded an organization called Across Our Kitchen Tables with a couple of friends who are also in the food industry, and it's really a network of women of color in the food industry who are, hands in the food or changing food policy or advocating for healthy food for all, like whether they're, doing all those different types of things to really come together and convene and have conversations about, the food industry and how we can better support one another. And so one of the panels that we had not too long ago was about midwifery in the city of Los Angeles, and how that practice was essentially one where you're still connected to the food and the land, and the way that you cultivate the food is feels more natural. If you were feeling like, if it was a woman who had just given birth, then this midwife would give support and guidance on the types of food that this person should be eating to kind of help them through the process of postpartum, right? But then you have the LA County Health Department that's put into place that essentially outlawed midwifery, and really started to change the landscape of how Latinos, Mexican American folks in the city of Los Angeles started to eat. There begins more of this process of assimilation that happens. And that's where you start to see people who are like, why would you have your own chickens or grow your own food or eat that type of way when you can just pick up food around the corner somewhere, right? So it really, really changed the landscape. And I think that oftentimes people think, when it comes to Mexican food specifically, that, it has to be a certain way. Like, what is a birthday without a carne asada? What is a pozole without chicken or pork? Like, what is, and so people have really evolved what tradition means to them. And I really like to challenge that norm, because those traditions have truly evolved. If you think about the way that our ancestors ate in a way that kept them healthy, where they didn't deal with the things that we deal with now, like diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, cancer. It's just so insane how far we've come, and how we need to kind of take a step back and bring back these practices that you're talking about,
No, I totally agree with you, and that's one of the something that I've always thought about, because I was always thinner and healthier when I was living at home than I am now. Not saying that I don't eat unhealthy, but I eat, it was just very simple, right? You
Mm-hmm.
know, a pot of beans was always there, eggs were always there, milk was always there, the basics, right? And some
Yeah.
tortillas, and we and when we ate closer to that, we were healthier. Yeah, my parents had meat, but meat was something that was not very frequent because we didn't have that much money, right? It was more on special occasions and the like. So,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because the Latino community does have a um, diabetes and an obesity epidemic going on. And one of the things I kind of think about and always thinking about is the social determinants of health, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you can you change certain things in order to change the health outcomes and the of a different of a certain population. Latinos is like sometimes when we lack access to healthy options, right? Not only
Yeah.
restaurants, but retailers. If it's only like a liquor store that serves chips
Yeah.
and high processed food because it stays on the shelves longer, right? How can we change that? And that's why it's interesting that what you're doing with your culinary um, direction is it really kind of focuses on health a lot of ways,
Mm-hmm.
but tradition, which is great.
Yeah, and kind of coming back to like the essence of that tradition,
Yeah,
because, as I was mentioning, we have kind of strayed and we need to kind of hone back into
yeah.
that like ancestral knowledge, essentially. One other thing that I wanted to mention was I recently was a part of this program with the James Beard Foundation that is essentially a group of chefs who gathered to learn more about how we can hone into our advocacy work, as chefs, like putting our voices out there and
Mhm.
sharing our stories a bit more. So it was about policy and advocacy. And one of the things that I really wanted to, um, I haven't done this very much, but wanted to start to advocate more on is the availability of SNAP funds that individual households have,
Yeah,
being able to use those funds at a restaurant, for example.
yeah,
Right now, the way that SNAP works, which is Supplemental Nutrition
yeah,
Assistance Program, for folks who haven't heard of that terminology, essentially what it is people will go and buy groceries, or they might go to the corner store that accepts SNAP, or they might go to a fast food chain to pick up a hot meal, but they're not allowed to use that at their local independent restaurant
yeah,
currently. And so that is something that, just kind of is mind boggling, because if a restaurant is willing to create a menu item that fits within the scope of what that person's able to afford, make sure that it's a highly nutritious meal, it would be essentially a win-win for both
yeah,
the family members who are using their EBT funds and the restaurant who truly need the financial support during a time like COVID. So
yeah.
what do you think about that, and like how that could potentially get pushed forward?
Yeah, no, I love ideas like that. I believe that 80% of SNAP benefits were actually redeemed at like a traditional grocery store in 2019, and there's about 500 plus, maybe 550, 580, somewhere around
Mm-hmm.
there, retailers in the 34th congressional district that accept SNAP benefits. But there
Mm-hmm.
are limitations, especially on restaurants. I think that's actually a great idea. I have a bill that I introduced. It's called the Enhanced Access to SNAP Act of 2019. And what it does, because you have to reach certain working requirements, right, in order
Mm-hmm.
to access SNAP. So one of the things was to expand eligibility to basically college students. So if you're in college, the number of hours, the number of units counts towards your work requirement in order to be eligible for
Mm-hmm.
SNAP. But that's also some of it is making it more flexible. If you're a student, you're often on the run. You're often not living. If you're living at home, that's great. Sometimes they're not, and being able to use those SNAP benefits besides at different retailers, traditional grocery store retailers, it would make a huge difference. So um,
Absolutely.
I know
Yeah.
that we've been looking at some ideas like that. I think even and it's doable. I think that it's completely doable to do it. I know Cal State LA actually provided some benefits to their students, but they bought vouchers from different restaurants in the area and they allowed them to go and use them. Being creative like that to help students, but also people who need nutritious meals, but at the same time, the local small restaurants, it would be big. I think it
Yeah.
would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one thing that I have learned more recently since I've been doing a lot more online cooking classes is that there are a lot of folks out there who just frankly don't know how to cook. They've lost connection with, or maybe just never had the opportunity to learn from a family member on how to cook. So they're really relying on, a staple that's already prepared where they can pick up. And if that means that they're going to be able to find it at a fast food chain, well, then that's, it's further feeding into this cycle that is making our community sick, because it's all intersectional, right? It's
Yeah.
not just a financial reasons. It's not. It's class reasons. It's like geographic location
Yeah.
reasons. It's so many reasons why. Like you said, a student might be working, studying all day. It might be a parent, a single parent who has to work two jobs to make ends
Right.
meet right now. And when are they going to have time to cook? And so if restaurants can play a role here, and I think that many restaurants would be willing to adjust and have, maybe it's a couple of menu items that are specific to this program that aren't on their regular menu. I think that, everything is possible. And right now we're in this process of like reimagining what LA looks like, right? I
Yeah.
think that it's time for us to kind of be even more creative about how we can use existing programs to benefit several different communities.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I know that in the city of LA on their senior meal programs that they were doing, that was federal money from the CARES Act.
Yeah.
I'm moving my table because the sun's moving.
Yeah. I know it's
Uh,
getting hot here too.
so being able to create that flexibility to contract and work with local, small local businesses to do that is totally doable, right? There actually are, like the city of LA is actually doing it as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there are certain requirements, but it's easier to meet than people actually know when it comes to creating those meals. Somebody mentioned a lot of I saw in the comments that it was a lot of administrative burdens that
Yeah.
prevent their enrollment. I agree, and that's why my bill that I'm doing is with the Western Center on Law and Poverty, is that they always have a good understanding of what's keeping people from enrolling. So we'll continue looking at that and trying to figure out how can we lower the burdens that keep people from enrolling. Um, how you structure a program is not just like how you pass it into law, but how
Mm-hmm.
then it's implemented is huge, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't even know about it, so you have to educate them about it. Sometimes people might know about it, but the way they define income prevents them from taking advantage or work requirements. So we have to be creative and then really kind of undo those burdens. But it oftentimes takes, honestly, it takes talking to people who were trying to access those programs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then
Mm-hmm.
also coming from certain backgrounds, you have a better understanding just naturally. But we're definitely going to look at how do we make SNAP more available for folks. And then I love the ideas about how do we kind of create the access for restaurants to use it. Um, I
Yeah,
think it's
and I'd
doable.
love to be involved in any way that I can to support that process and happening. I can definitely get other restaurants involved in advocating for that to happen if
Yeah,
that makes sense for them, which I assume
yeah,
does. I have another sort of example or question.
yeah,
I was operating out of a shared commercial kitchen space for the first, few years after launching our savory catering menu, and this is
yeah.
where we would my staff members would come in. I had my whole kitchen team, and we shared the space with several other businesses. Now, since COVID happened, there was a little bit of a sense, not a little bit, a lot of bit of a sense from my team that they just didn't feel quite safe being in that shared kitchen space, and also, because of the pivoting that's happened. There wasn't essentially like a need to use that kitchen since we can't cater any events. There's no gatherings happening right now. And so this really puts a huge burden on the owner of this kitchen, right? Who essentially opened up this shared facility for many operators to be able to grow their businesses. But if they all leave, then that creates a lot of pressure for her to keep the doors open for businesses that are still operating there, future businesses that would like to come back. And so my question is really about rent relief.
Yeah.
Because, you know, many folks are out there saying, talk to your landlord, see if you can find some sort of agreement. And it really leaves it to that relationship between the tenant and the landlord. But, you know, in this case and in many others, we know that landlords aren't always the most awesome people who are thinking about community first, but they are thinking about their bottom line, just trying to, you know, get the money that they need. Either they're paying their mortgage or they are, they just want to, you know, get their monthly income from that rent. So what are your I guess, how are you advocating for you know, these rent issues and maybe even potential conversations about pausing, canceling rent?
Yeah. We have I actually have a bill called the Rent Relief Act, and what it would do is create, this is for renters of not businesses though, but for individual renters, is how do you, it's called the Rent Relief Act. And I introduced this back in beginning of 2019 with Kamala Harris, not because like we're in the pandemic, because rents are unsustainable right now for working class people, right? And a lot of them were ending up on the streets because they couldn't afford the payments. They would have to move further and further out, and it was just putting a lot of stress. So what it does is anybody that pays more than 30% of their income towards rent would get a monthly refundable tax credit. So instead of waiting towards the end of the year for the payment, the refund, they would, like, you know, when you file your taxes, you would get it on an ongoing monthly basis into your account, the difference between your rent and 30% of your income. That is a bill that I think I have actually a better chance of passing next year, because if Kamala Harris is elected, I know that this was one of her priority bills, right, when she was a senator. It was, and the way it works in Congress is that the same version of the bill is introduced in the House and in the Senate. It just, you know, it just under the other person's name. So because you can't co-sponsor necessarily directly. So that is a big deal. We also, in the CARES Act, we had a mortgage, an eviction moratorium. We need to we're establishing that through the HEROES Act, because we can't have people being evicted from their homes, especially during the pandemic, especially during the time where there's already a historic number of people unhoused, right? So we got to keep them in their homes, because once they get on the streets, it's harder to get them housed again. The longer they're out, the longer they stay out. So it really is crucial. Let's stop that wave. And if California doesn't do it, the federal government doesn't do it, there will be a wave of evictions. That is a top priority.
It really is a top priority. I mean, I feel like the moratorium is helpful, yet it's still kind of, you know, kicking it down into the, you know, kicking the can down the line, essentially, right? It doesn't really, like, you know, if there's no income coming in, who's to say that a few months down the line, enough income will come in to pay, you know, the 6-7 months of rent that were just, you know,
and that's
remarkably low.
And that's why, you know, we get criticized about the $600 a week in extra unemployment. Our bill was it could extend it through the end of the year, right, when it ended in July. And we were getting criticized about, oh, you're paying these people too much money, they're not going to, like, go back to work. It's like, no, people don't go back to work because there's not jobs, right? And here's the thing, the $600 comes out to, and plus the max, say you're unemployed and you get a $600 a week on top of the max $450 per week by the state of California, that's $1,050 per week, right? And it is actually, when you look at a week by week, it replaces the net take-home income of somebody that makes $76,300 per year. Unemployment extension was huge. Like, it was such a big deal and people didn't realize it. But there's more we can do, actually. a co-author of the Emergency Money for the People Act that would give an extra $2,000 to people during COVID who make under $130,000 per year. It's similar to the basic income, universal basic income idea, but it's really more targeted to people who are struggling. And you're right. There's a difference in the mortgage. We did have a bill for people with property that said, okay, you can, if you have a renter, you can apply, you can, and the renter can't make their rent, you can apply for a program, and the program would pay the rent for that individual as long as you were, and you would be required to, like that person, either one of them could apply for it, right? And that would be, and the landlord would be forced to accept that payment. So that's something that we were actually in the HEROES Act that Maxine Waters introduced. So it's actually Maxine Waters' bill. So additionally, got to provide rent relief for mortgages. So instead of like having these balloon payments, right, there's deferment, which then all of a sudden at the end of the period of time they owe all this money, to actually take the what they owe and put it on the back of their mortgage, right? So they're just extending.
Oh, I see.
So
Yeah.
So the idea is if they're allowed to do that, then they must give people who are renting the break because of that. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
you always
And I
have to
have
think
heard
about
that. Yeah.
Because here's the thing: there's some people, there are some owners that didn't even want to accept government help, right? Because their main goal was actually to kick people out of their apartments, their businesses, right? Is because they know that they can make more money down the road if they get rid of their long-term tenant, right? And so that is
Yeah, and
despicable, to be honest
that
with you.
leads me to like one last question, which
Yeah,
is something that, I live in Highland Park. I've lived all throughout the East Side. I grew up on the East Side, specifically Southeast LA. And there have been major changes happening in this area,
yeah,
specifically gentrification. And
yeah,
COVID is really something that is giving a lot of people anxiety because
yeah,
there's such a potential for gentrification to, happen so much faster because some of these landlords are, trying to get these long-term tenants out of their spaces so that they can bring in higher paying tenants. So, I mean, what are some ways that, that you can figure out support systems so that we can continue to create like placekeeping systems
yeah.
and keep the existing businesses afloat and in these spaces for long periods of time and really avoid gentrification from taking over these
Yeah.
areas, because that's truly how we lose the character of our cities.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. And I've been thinking about it a lot. I actually minored in urban planning. I studied housing when I was an undergrad. And it's so market driven, but there's so many different factors because of it, right? A good example, my wife and I were looking at buying a house in 2014. That was our first house. We saved, like, my parents didn't give me money to buy my house. I literally had to save it over time in order to have that money, right? So to get my 10% down payment, my wife and I did. But when we were going from home to home, looking at the homes that were on sale, it tended to be a lot of Latinos, older, who bought their homes 20 years ago, 30 years or even longer, that maybe bought it for 40,000, 50,000, 100,000, right?
Yeah.
And what they were facing is because we don't have a good public pension system, right? Social Security doesn't pay people enough. They don't have 401ks because they're they worked in industries that didn't provide 401ks. They were maybe earning under the table. All of a sudden their homes are worth 600,000, 400,000, 500, 600, 700, 800, and you have people that are offering to buy that house. Well, a lot of them are like, I'm 75 years old, how much longer am I going to live? So they're selling their homes and then moving out to Lancaster and Palmdale and different areas to buy just a bigger home, right? Or smaller, same size, so for cheaper, and then they have the difference. So we need to take, so my point on that is we need to make sure that seniors don't have to worry about how they're going to pay their bills. And if you relieve that tension, they're less likely to sell because they often want to live near their family, right? The communities that they grew up in. my mother lives out in Riverside where I grew up, and she doesn't know anything on her house, but she likes going to the church down the street where she lives, right? She
Hmm.
and all the and we're her kids are the social safety net. We all give her money
Yeah.
monthly to keep her in the house. And people don't think it's connected. It is connected, right? Because
Yeah.
once you sell that house for $650,000, well, the property value of the house next door and the one next door and the one next door go up. And then putting more pressure on who? You have all the speculators coming in trying to buy those houses to sell them, to flip them, to make money, right?
Yeah.
So you got to take care of that pressure. At the same time, when it comes to renters, you want to control the price of the rent that's coming in. So I'm a supporter of the Rent Stabilization Act here in California, in LA, but it only applies to multi-unit housing that was built before 1978, right?
Yeah.
You got to extend that to include newer housing, right? Because a lot of the
Yeah.
housing built before 1978, it's getting less and less and less, and so you got to control that aspect of it. And then you got to, because if not, people are going to be displaced, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
so we got to attack it from multiple directions. Building more affordable and workforce units is key as well in some of these communities. Workforce, as in people who work in a particular industry that they can live in near close to their industry. So
Hmm.
not I'm not talking about but I'm talking about like the people that work in restaurants, right? Hotels, right? Imagine all the hotel workers in downtown LA. Well, imagine if they didn't have to commute from the Inland Empire 2 hours, 3 hours each way. What kind of change in the quality of life, right? So it's going to take a multifaceted approach to stop it. But also, when we're developing, say we're building a new park, we also have to build new housing that's workforce, right? Because
Yeah.
that new park will create more pressure on the property value. So it's not an easy situation to resolve, but we're tackling it one step at a time, right? And also, the local elected officials have to make different decisions when it comes to land use, like who do they allow to build and what do they allow them to build.
Hmm.
Sometimes people have what they call by right. They can build by right.
Yeah.
um, we got to tackle that as well because it also impacts the character of the neighborhoods.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like there's so much work to do. I mean, right now, this week, I am really encouraging everybody to get out and vote. Because all these, even some of the things that you were brought up were on recent ballots that didn't pass.
Yeah.
And we have to get out there and make sure that our voices count this Tuesday or vote by mail. And Congressman Jimmy Gomez, we've gone over time, but I want to thank you so much for your time today, and for kind of talking through some of these ideas and trying to figure out how we can better support our community members. And I would love to be involved in any future conversations around including SNAP
Oh,
and
perfect.
EBT at restaurants,
Yeah.
and help to organize in any way. But thank you so much
Yeah.
for your time and for your
No.
work, and hopefully we get to connect again soon.
Yeah. No. Thank you. And I'm bummed um, this interview didn't happen in person. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't taste any of your food from here.
Yeah. I know.
I feel like
Yeah,
I was like, man, um,
I know. I
you
just
know,
keep telling everybody you're gonna have to get the cookbook this year, and then maybe later in the future we can do the whole food situation, you
yeah.
know?
Well, well, hang in there, and if you know of any small businesses that are having issues with the Small Business Administration getting a PPP loan or economic injury disaster loan, reach out. On We actually helped about one-on-one, like 21, 23 businesses. Even though my team is small, we help them personally get through the
Hmm.
bureaucracy. So
Yeah,
everything
part of it is
from,
also now the forgiveness. People
yeah,
are having issues giving it forgiven. I used 100% of my PPP on
yeah,
payroll, and
yeah,
if that does not get forgiven, I don't know what the heck I'm gonna do. So,
yeah. And we're looking at expand, like that's just part of the talks. Is just it's actually easier just to forgive the loans, especially for the smaller businesses, than it is to try
yeah,
to have them pay. Right? It's just like
yeah,
it's so much easier to do it that way. So that is being looked at. Just
Hmm.
simple forgiveness straight up
Yeah.
across the board. So, but thank you so much for inviting me, and I look
Yeah.
forward to having another conversation. And congratulations on the engagement, and also thank you for being a role model on starting small businesses on. Um, the Latina Fair Pay Day, right? When we basically
Yes.
the day where,
Today.
yeah, we're recognizing the disparity of the
Hmm.
Latinas only get paid 54, 55 cents on the dollar that a white man gets.
Hmm.
It's still a big issue, and we need to still continue
Huge.
bringing it up. So, but I just want to say that you've been an inspiration, for myself, because I've always thought I would start a small business or a restaurant when I was, um, younger, but I don't have a palate for it. So I can eat the food, but I'm not that. So keep it up, and let us know how we can be of assistance. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, take care. Thank you so much for joining.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.